Good afternoon, everyone. No response. You're dead in the water already, and it's only the middle of the first day. Okay, my name's Donald Clark, and I'm with Tarek, and we're going to talk about AI in general, but AI and learning very specifically. We're two completely different people in a sense. Tarek will give you a real hardcore academic view of this. I'm more from a sort of business entrepreneurial side, but I think that will be fruitful. Sort of 2 + 2 = 5. We also want to really, and I mean this, really give you an opportunity to ask questions and kill us up here on the stage. So we'll leave plenty of time for that. Can I have my first slide, please? Okay, that wasn't the first slide, but let me go back. There we are. Okay. I did this in preparation for this talk, okay? And somebody on Twitter this morning said, oh yeah, it's just that typical hyping AI entrepreneur thing, you know, so it's going to take over the world. But I actually did it ironically, because you often get this misconception that AI and learning is going to be robot teachers. There is nothing more ridiculous than the idea of a robot teacher. It's almost akin to saying we'll have self-driving cars and we'll build robots to drive the self-driving cars. It's a stupid idea in many ways. It may be possible with young kids or people with dementia and so on, but it's not the point. And in many ways, the whole field has been distorted by the media and headlines. And I think one thing myself and Tarek have in common here is to dampen down the hype so that it can be really applied in our field, which is the learning game. So let's start with the what is AI. I've stolen this from Toby Walsh, who's written an excellent introductory book called Android Dreams. I highly recommend the book. He's here at this conference. And when I say AI is an idiot savant, I mean it's profoundly stupid. It doesn't know shit, really. But it's also really, really smart. Okay? And to illustrate an example of this, years and years ago, I bought the first robot Hoover, and it swept across my room, bouncing from wall to wall, didn't pick up any dust, complete waste of money. If you buy a Roomba now, the latest one for Christmas, it will map out your room, map out the next room. If it comes to a stair, it knows it's on the lip, will reverse. It will go and recharge itself when it comes low on electricity, and it's a smart machine. But if you have a dog, and it comes and does a shit in the middle of your carpet, it will mathematically spread the shit to every single corner of your carpet because it's a dumb machine. It's no consciousness. It doesn't know what it is. It can't cope with flexibility. And I think that's a good sort of way of describing how bad this can be, but also actually how powerful it can be as well, because it can do things, narrow things very, very well indeed. Just over a year ago, I was teaching at the University of Pennsylvania, which happens to be Trump's alma mater, and in the morning of the election, it was November the 8th, the day of the election, and it was to a number of postdoc people, and I showed this slide, and I explained, and this, remember, Hillary was 14 points ahead in the polls at that point, and I turned to the audience and said, I think Trump's going to win, because I had been following Mog AI, which is an AI company in India, who had been looking at intent in social media. And they found a big distinction between the Trump supporters and Hillary supporters. The Trump supporters were retweeting and had much more sentiment and intent behind their actions. So they came to the conclusion that that would swing it, and boy, were they right. Why were the polls wrong? Because the polls were still using the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell technology. Have you ever phoned up a 15-year-old and asked them for marketing information? Have you ever phoned up your daughter or son and tried to use voice on a mobile phone? They don't want to know. The fact is we should be harvesting data smartly and using it smartly if we're going to try and predict things going forward. Now, I'm going to ask just a few questions, provocative things here. First is the impact on jobs. At the time, it was thought that Trump was entirely wrong in this, but he wasn't entirely wrong in terms of the people who voted for him, because the bottom line is around the world, and this is a World Bank economist, we have a rise in middle-class income in the Far East, the rise of China. But if you look at this called the elephant curve, if you look at the dip here, this is the decline of the world's middle classes. These are the people who voted for Trump. These are the people who voted Brexit. And they had good cause. because their wages were declined, the hopes for their children had been dashed. They saw the future, and the future wasn't particularly bright because inequality had spread out. The people at the bottom were not doing well from this. And if you look at manufacturing data in the US, manufacturing was doing very, very well. That's the red line. But the number of people that make the money had plummeted because of automation. So the first big hit on the economy with AI was, of course, dumb robots in manufacturing plants. But read the book Janesville, Pulitzer Prize Washington Post journalist who went to this little town in the Midwest and saw what happened when 9,000 people were made redundant on the one day when the GM plant was closed down. This is a real thing. This will lead to some job losses. However, be very careful of the hype around these, and this is, if you've not seen this, you've not been reading the newspapers or watching TV. This came out of Oxford in 2013. 47% of jobs will be automated in the next 20 years. No, no, no. And if you really read the report and don't just listen to the crap journalism around this, you will see that it was a really awful bit of science. They took 702 jobs. They trained a piece of AI. They used AI or machine learning to try and predict the future, which is always a dangerous thing. And they came to ridiculously exaggerated conclusions. One of the conclusions, which Toby rightly criticizes in his book, was that hairdressers are likely to be automated. Well, not in my bloody lifetime. I'm going to let nobody near me with a razor if it's a robot. There were several other examples. Interestingly, education. Almost every report that tries to predict automation says that, oh, the teachers will be untouched. No, no, we're immune. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. It's already happened. If you look at corporate training, I've been in that business for 33 years. I reckon there's less than 50% of the number of trainers, if you look at it on a ratio basis, than there was 30 years ago because of the online learning market. It's a $50 billion market. That's replaced trainers. There are far fewer librarians. The number of librarians in the US has been plummeting since Google came on board. That's not a neoliberal plot. It's because people don't go to libraries or they buy cheap books on Amazon. You know, this has already happened. The learning community is far from immune from this one. And if you look at the companies by market cap here, 2006, it was all banks and gas and oil companies. Look at 2016. Apple, Alphabet, which is Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. Suddenly you get these AI companies creeping in. That's 2016 by market cap. Look at 2017, this year. Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Tencent, Facebook, Alibaba, all of them really have AI as the central technological strategy. That's absolutely core to their future, as is IBM, which is creeping up there. And you will no longer get oil and bank companies in this mix now. Future banks will actually be AI companies. Okay? And another important thing from the learner's perspective is don't imagine this has had nothing to do with you. Every single one of your learners, when they open a mobile phone or take a photograph on their mobile phone, are using AI. I mean, AI is deeply embedded in all comms in terms of the decompression of files and so on. But if you use Google, hey, presto, every single letter has been using Google for a couple of decades now. It's pure AI. It's already revolutionized your world. If you use Facebook or Twitter, it's mediated by AI. If you watch something on Netflix, then you will have watched a movie or a box set which some piece of software has recommended to you. Don't think because you're smart, you're immune. You will have bought books on Amazon because a piece of software recommended them to you. That's a fact. It's in the data. So it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. I flew here from London. I went to the car park. It knew my car through license plate recognition. I went to the airport, my passport in. There's face recognition software. I glide through. I step on board a 737. At about 1,000 feet, the pilot switches to autopilot, and basically I fly to Berlin inside a robot. Now, it lands in Berlin, and the only reason the pilot lands because they're so bored that they actually quite like landing the aircraft. But you could fly across the Atlantic in a plane without a pilot. That's not going to happen soon. Can you imagine sitting in a huge aircraft with 300 people and there is no pilot? Because culture always trumps tech. So don't imagine that this is going to happen very, very soon. Then a really bizarre one. And you might think that this sex sort of robot thing is taken off. Well, there's a very famous robot, this one called Harmony, who speaks bizarrely with a Scottish accent. I'm Scottish. Believe me, I never came across anything like this in Scotland when I lived there. And it's totally ridiculous. It's basically a piece of rubber with a really crap and cheap chatbot inside of it. It's hopeless. We have to be very careful with all this sort of hype around what this technology is going to do. Let's come back to learning, though, because that's the game we're in, and that's why we're at this conference, because it has an impact here. It saddens me that the only place, so I teach in universities, it saddens me that when I walk through the door, the only place I find AI is in checking whether students cheat. It's the only use I made of the thing. Isn't that ridiculous? The only use of really smart technology in teaching and learning is checking to see if kids cheat. And they only cheat because essays are just a really hopeless assessment thing, and they play a game with you. And actually increasing numbers of kids, of course, are buying essays for $150 to $1,000 from Chinese websites. And they will beat the AI because they're written by PhD students, and they know how to beat the error checking. This is another stupid thing here. So it's Professor Ishiguro in Japan. He actually has built a robot. He's the only guy on the planet who looks more like a robot than his robot. And he's built a robot, and it delivers his lectures. I can't think of a more dumbass use of technology than that. While he goes off to Europe, swanning around, it delivers lectures. Why on earth would you turn up to that? It seems just absolutely ridiculous. But it does say something about the stupidity of lecturing. That's true. Reflect on that for a moment. And of course, we've already had AI in the learners because they've been using Google for eons, and it's giving people access to all sorts of things. Hardly any kids do really serious technical degrees. I have a son who's just finished a degree in artificial intelligence, and they're online using stuff from MIT, other major Stanford, all the time, because the standard lectures are never enough in his field, and it's always a moving feast. So this has given learners a real bit of freedom. You can use AI to create content. So this tool here, Wildfire, you just feed it a text file, you press a button, it creates some e-learning. It's basic knowledge-based e-learning, but that used to take about 6 months and cost about $20,000 an hour. It can now be done in minutes and about 10% of the cost. You have all sorts of little apps that learners are using without telling their teachers. So most 13-year-olds will have photomaths on their phone, and if you give them homework, they'll point it towards the maths problem, and it will give them the answer. The kids love it. The teachers hate it. But actually, it's quite smart because the steps button gives them the breakdown between the question and the answer, which is where all the teaching takes place. Actually, really, really smart approach from a teaching perspective. And then, of course, we have the now infamous Georgia Tech bot, which was launched. This is some time ago, a couple of years now. These bots, you have to be really careful as well. They're fiendishly difficult to build. Very, very difficult to build. And this took about 40,000 pieces of data over 4 years before it became even remotely useful for students. But boy, was it useful. So there were 9 teachers, 350 students, and they swapped one of the teachers out for a bot. Okay? And guess what? They put it up for a teaching award. Why? Because it was quick. It's that simple. If you're doing a course in a contemporary university and you submit a piece of work or you ask a question by email, what do you think the mean time is for faculty to get back to you?
2 weeks.
You're not far off. Weeks. It's actually weeks. Isn't that bizarre? That's not learning. It's got nothing to do with learning. Far too late. This thing, in fact, they had to put a delay in to make it look like a real human being was typing the answer. And of course, it was consistent, it was precise, and it was a student support mechanism. And they've now gone on to do much, much more than this and moving it into commercial product. There's a whole session on this tomorrow. If you want to see loads of chatbot stuff, 2:30 tomorrow. Because it can find stuff. It can do, these bots are difficult to build, but when you do them well, it's one of the applications where you can bring a human layer through AI to the front end of that flat, boring e-learning that we've had to live with for all those years, text, graphic, multiple choice question. Okay? But I think the big one, and the one I've been heavily involved in, is adaptive learning, personalized learning. The idea that you should educate everyone uniquely. So if you take a maths curriculum, across the top there is the fairly linear structure of almost every maths curriculum in school or college. In truth, a maths curriculum is quite a complicated network of dependencies. And kids fail all the time here because they just hit one of those red lines, they don't get it, the rest of the class and the teacher moves on, catastrophic failure. That's not the way to teach people. It should be like a sat-nav in your car, you're driving from one place to another. If you go off course, you get help to come back on course. You need that personal help. And that's what this software does. This is, this is 50 programmers in India for 3 to 4 years building this stuff. It's really serious software, smart software that helps people get back on board so that you do vector through courses at your pace, getting feedback that you need as an individual. That's almost impossible when you're teaching 300 people or even 30 people in a class. And of course, we have good data on this. It certainly increases attainment. Because there's a correlation, decreases dropout. And do people like it? Well, the blue and the green are student reactions. Yes, they like it and want other course. ASU, very interesting. Huge university. The kids are asking for this across the whole of the degree course. These were 101 first-year undergraduate courses, biology, American history, a whole range of things. They're now asking for it in year 2, and they're now being commissioned as we speak. Interesting. And of course, there's assessment. If you do a Coursera course, you do your little typing thing. It knows that I'm Donald, so when I sit my exam online, that's AI. It knows that I'm typing the exam. It will do face recognition, AI. It knows who I am. You can actually do real-time face recognition now that shows whether you're cheating or not. How spooky and bizarre is that? But that's all coming to assessment. And then another thing down here that I just want to, a provocation again, is when I give talks on AI, I always get the same questions about, surely AI is biased because it's written by young white men and they're intrinsically racist. Believe me, nothing could be further from the truth. Almost every one of those kids that I work with, you have to work really, really hard to write racism and sexism into an algorithm. And it's normally got nothing to do with the algorithm, it's to do with the data sets. Huge amount of confusion over this area. All humans are biased. That's a fact. Read Kahneman and Tversky. All humans are biased. You're all sexist. You're all racist. It's the truth. You all have confirmation bias. Hardly any AI is biased, in fact. It's quite difficult to make it biased. The truth of the matter is this thing here is the problem we have in teaching and learning, and AI perhaps augments this, doesn't replace it, augments it by really closing it down its weaknesses, and its weaknesses are really clear. We all know, if you've been in teaching, that it takes about 20 years to train a young person before they become even remotely useful in the workplace. That's a long time, sitting in chairs like this, listening to lectures, teachers. That's weird. Long, long time. They're inattentive. I mean, this is your first day at the conference. Believe me, by midday tomorrow, you will be desperate to get out shopping. The human brain is not good at sitting for 2 solid days listening to this stuff. It's not the way we evolved. It suffers from cognitive overload. There are ways of doing that, using algorithms on feedback bins. It forgets almost everything. The most bizarre thing, 1885, Ebbinghaus. So you have forgotten almost everything I have said already? That's science. What do we do about that in education? We do absolutely nothing. We still deliver flat lectures, flat content, in the expectation that that was it. No, it isn't. That's only the beginning of a learning journey. So we forget everything, we become demotivated. You're all biased. There are about 50 rock-solid biases that you're actually born with and you can't train out of. Okay? On top of that, you all sleep 8 hours a day, perhaps longer, at conferences because you've been drinking too much the night before. You can't download anything. I can't download anything from your brain or your brain to my brain. I can't network in any way. There's no sense of collective intelligence. And of course, we all die. So this thing, this organ, is an incredibly bad learning machine. But teachers also have these biases. And teaching is infused with bias. There's a very good reason why women are subtly moved away from STEM subjects in schools. And that's because parents, there are a lot of both parents and teachers subtly shift girls towards art subjects. If you look at plain assessment, when you mark an essay, you will be influenced by the score you gave on the previous essay. If you know the name of the person, you'll be influenced by that. If you know the gender of the person, you'll be influenced by it. You can't help it. The research is really clear on this as well. That's why we go for anonymizing assessment. But these are the areas that AI can really help us with, okay? Last slide, and this is a bit worrying. So AI is becoming quite smart at very specific tasks, not general tasks. And so we have a suite of AI that passed the Tokyo entrance exam. This is over a year ago now. Toby presented this last year. Now, if AI can pass a graduate level exam in physics, English, history, and so on day one, at entry, you'll be damn sure that AI is going to be sort of graduate class on some things when it exits. Probably after a couple of months and not 3 years or 4 years of drinking and going on holiday and so on. It will become a graduate level competent being, not in a general sense, but in a narrow sense, in, for example, law, accountancy, some of those very narrow tasks. Diagnosis as a doctor, that's already happening. We may very well be teaching the wrong things, things that will be automated within a few years. AI affects what you teach, why you teach, and I think also how you teach. It will change that landscape, because what people have to know in the future will be different from what it is now. All those basic competencies that are repetitive, and a lot of middle-class jobs are like that. A lot of management is repetition. You know, a lot of accountancy work, a lot of law. There are thousands of American kids now graduating in law, tumbling into the marketplace, and there are no law jobs. Why? Because the bottom of the law profession has been automated. It's a very easy thing to do the discovery, the contract clause stuff through automation. It's far quicker and far more accurate. So I'll leave you on that provocation and pass over to Tarek now. But remember what I said there. It will change what you teach, it will change how you teach, and it will change why you teach it. And this will happen very, very quickly. That's not hype, I don't think. Okay, thanks for listening. Thank you.
Okay, so also from my side, a wonderful good afternoon. As Donald already said, I'm the academic perspective. So I'm a lecturer in data science at City University of London. I'm originally a trained cognitive scientist who happened to get into this AI stuff. But I'm usually playing on the strong AI side. So trying to build intelligent systems which somehow mimic cognitive capacities of humans. Okay, let's get this going. This is cutting-edge robotics technology 2017. Okay, so what you just saw, this is not a mock-up video. This is a collection of outtakes from the RoboCup 2017, so the World Championship in Robotics Soccer. And this is what everyone tells you will take over your jobs in 3 to 5 years' time, right? So that's the baseline of is as compared to what people tell you. And still, this is a point I will return to over and over again, playing soccer on a clearly delimited field, with clear lines, with clearly denoted goals, is a very, very specific task, right? And still, we suck at even making these things walk forwards and kick a ball without toppling over, in a world where we perfectly know their mass models and everything. Good. There was a little priming. Then, second little priming. Not every modern technology is AI. So it currently seems that when the media is reporting on something which is cool and new, somehow the word artificial intelligence has to be on there. Actually, very, very few current technology is AI. Let's have a look. I don't know, does any one of you actually have one of these fancy little things at home? Amazon Alexa, yes? Did it already order something you never wanted to have? Okay, cool. Yeah, that's what it does. So, Amazon Alexa, sure, there's AI in that. You have speech processing, it somehow interacts, it tries to learn your preferences. Cool. VR is not AI. VR is a totally cool engineered application of IT technology. It uses computing to generate a somewhat plausible environment around you, but it is not AI. Your VR glasses will never talk back to you. Your VR glasses will never brew you coffee. Your VR glasses are just an interaction medium. Maybe this is a bit more widespread. Who's ever stood in a public place, held a kind of like rectangular device in front of themselves and said, OK, Google? No users? OK, thank you. This is also AI. There's speech processing. It's tapping into a knowledge base. It's trying to find things for you. It makes you also look slightly awkward in public, but sure. This is not AI. A robotic arm, as currently deployed in factories, does one thing and one thing only, namely what it's programmed for. That thing might lift up a car door, shift it to the other side. That thing might sort, I don't know, sweets on a conveyor belt, but it does only one thing. And there is no intelligence in this. If you actually want to change shifting the car door from left to right to shifting the car door from right to left, you usually have to deploy a human programmer. It costs you a mid-range 5-digit amount of euros, and then it can do the thing. Nonetheless, this is basically just a mechanical device without intelligence by and for itself. OK, nonetheless, if you not only have a look at the media, but also at fairly official outlets, it seems that AI is sneakily taking over, right? So these are quotes from a report by the government of New South Wales on education future frontiers. And they have an introductory section where they try to outline why AI is such a big thing. Let's go through them. IBM Watson made headlines when it diagnosed a rare form of cancer faster and more accurately than doctors. This is correct. A couple of engineers had invested 5 to 10 years' time, and they have built a system which can quickly go through documents, extract certain markers by a frequency analysis over how often they are mentioned, then do refined statistics, and for that one application, delivers better results than a doctor. And we're not even talking about cancer in general. We're talking about that one very specific, very narrow application. Sure. But does this mean it can detect cancer quicker? No, because it can only detect this one very specific form thereof. And your doctor is actually a general-purpose device, if you ever noticed. So they can tell you why you are sneezing. They can tell you about your cancer. This is something completely different. The LA Times generated attention when it published a story about an earthquake in the US that was written entirely by algorithm. Yes, it was written by algorithm in that someone had predefined how to take an already existing story from the internet, shorten and summarize it. What you do there is, for example, you cross out all unnecessary adjectives in the sentence. Bam. What you do there is you leave out historical references. Bam. This is not journalism. This is shortening things. Peer-to-peer models in insurance and financial lending are using bots and machine learning to generate quotes and approve requests without the need for human brokers. Sure. But what you could equally well do is you take a human and you teach him a bit of stats. Usually linear regression is enough. And then you let the human crunch that thing. Nonetheless, this human will be bored out of his or her mind pretty quickly. So sure, program it. Still, this is also, by the way, not fully deployed. Everyone always says that finance is automated. Finance delivery is. We can scan your bank transfer note. We can run a handwriting recognition over it, and we can transfer the money. Everything which involves trading, fraud detection, and so on, currently still relies either on human supervision or on hand-coded rule-based systems. Simply because we can't do it yet with machine learning, and it's not even certain that we will outperform something which a seasoned broker can do. Contradicting or pushing back a little on some of the things Donald said, contract law, legal research, and accounting are already experiencing increased automation of what were considered high-skilled tasks. Not correct. They are experiencing automation on standard tasks. So if you are a completely untalented rent lawyer and all you do is send standard letters to poor tenants and houses, sure, we can automatize that because all we have to do is switch in and out the address and the name. As soon as you're talking about a somewhat complex task in tax, in law, you need a human. So due to my profession, over the last 3 years, I usually had earnings in at least 2 European countries each year. Usually, I also was employed in a bit odd parts of countries like autonomous provinces. There is no way how you can even get a mediocre human tax advisor to the point that they understand how to tax me. Forget about the AI. What we can do is we can do handwriting recognition, we can do automated delivery. Still, the actual intelligent part stays on the human side. Cognitive computing is a huge success for IBM's PR machine. A, it has little to do with cognition. B, it's correct that we can now do way better natural language processing, that we can do information lookup, but this stops at your OK Google phone. And if you're using it frequently, you also very frequently see where it hits its boundaries, namely as soon as it would need genuine understanding of what you want. So try to say, OK, Google, please make sure I'm having a nice evening with my girlfriend or boyfriend. This doesn't work, because for this you have to know what a nice evening is, what it entails, how to entertain the other person. These are many human insights and human qualities you cannot formally define. And this is where AI breaks again. Yeah, we can carry this on, but for the sake of time, let's get back into education. So I basically took the, in my opinion, usual stereotypes of why AI is going to put many of you out of work. Let's have a look at them. So, teaching robots. For some reason, people seem to be obsessed with robots as teachers. And the idea, at least as far as I understand it, actually I don't understand it, but at least as far as I can reproduce it, is that there will be somewhat classical robots come into learning spaces and either act as teachers fully or at least as motivational elements. So like these little nows here, interacting with the kids. It's a cute idea. Nonetheless, if you then have a look at actual usage studies, we aren't even certain that it brings any benefit. At the beginning, kids and learners engage more, but the question is this due to novelty, because they're just not used to it and it's something curious, or is it actually something which is a quality of the platform? And the data we have this far is still much too few and much too particular, but it looks as if it would wear off. So kids for a while enjoy engaging full with the robot, but then they also fall out of touch again, which would rather suggest that it's a novelty effect than anything which is really due to the platform itself. It's like getting a new teacher. At first, you also like them usually until you figure, yeah, maybe not. Then, second category of teaching robots are usually these little interactive gadgets. So Ozobots, kubelets. Kubelets are the things on the lower left. They are teaching tools. What can you do with them? Well, you can combine them, plug them together, and then you can write little programs in order to have them do simple tasks. Sure, this is cute. This teaches you deductive reasoning, logical thinking, but this also usually is not what people think of when they think of robotic teachers. And this is definitely not going to put anyone out of work. This is a teaching tool, nothing more. The guy on the lower right is called Pleo. And Pleo is an attempt of having kids engage more with biology. So presumably you can't read it, but Pleo, for example, has touch sensors all over, has an auditory sensor. And the idea is that, OK, kids then interact with Pleo in order to make Pleo interact with its environment. So basically, you teach your fake pet where it is and what it does. I never understood why you just don't get a real pet, so I don't see the point why this thing has to be robotic and made of plastic, but OK. Nonetheless, punchline, this is also not what people think of when they talk robots. Everyone always thinks that some form of robot will walk in, presumably having a slight Austrian accent, and then start changing everything. Intelligent tutoring systems. Donald already mentioned Jill Watson. Sure, they are highly useful for highly standardized routine tasks. So why was Jill Watson as popular as she was? Precisely because Jill Watson was responsive, had an okay ratio of correct answers to standard questions. But this only works because Ashok Goel, so the gentleman standing there, the father of Jill, has been teaching computer science courses for years, and there are always the same questions coming up. When is the homework due? Why do I have to write this programming routine like that? Sure, he just has the records from years of teaching, and if Jill is off on the more extravagant questions, then there were human tutors flanking her, who immediately would step in. And in order to, by the way, maintain, so Ashok had created the illusion that Jill would be a human. In order to maintain that illusion, the humans had to watch her quite closely, because sometimes students would ask questions which, for example, would have required Jill to say which exercise she liked better. Of course, she couldn't reply because she does not have feelings. She doesn't like things. She gave somewhat awkward answers, and then it's quite funny to read what the human tutors had to come up with in order to make the students believe that Jill is a human. So it's then along the lines, yeah, our Jill is a little pragmatic. What she actually meant is this or that. So Jill Watson works great. All of these intelligent tutoring systems work great on standard routine tasks in a domain which we know or for which we have lots of data. Also meaning it doesn't work on flexible domains, on rare domains, on things which are not solvable by statistics. One of the application areas where I actually think we can change things, but it's not that this will put anyone out of work, sorry to disappoint, is learning analytics. So at least as long as people engage with their learner or their teacher, depending on what side you're on, via a platform where we can record what people are doing, we can get a statistical idea of, okay, person X works better with learning style Y, person A works better with teacher B, and teacher B has these and those features. So we can try to, for example, map students to teachers. These are things we can do. Nonetheless, this does not replace the teacher. This just creates a better fit. This just identifies who should teach whom, or who should learn under whose supervision, who should learn with what learning style. Totally cool, totally awesome, but not putting anyone out of work. Programming skills. I don't know who came up with the idea that children, preferably in kindergarten, should learn to program. This seems to be the thing. So in 15 years from now, if you are not completely fluent in C, Java, and preferably some exotic Haskell dialect by the age of 10, you're doomed. Like, basically, you will never get a job. You will end up in the street. How? Why? Oh, my God. If actually it's required that in 10 or 15 years from now, everyone knows programming the way we do it now, I and my entire field will have completely failed you. It's possible, but we will have completely failed you. Why? There's something called human-computer interaction design. We do not want to build machines which require obscure, somewhat arbitrary interactions. What we would like to build are machines which have much more natural interaction forms. And unless we plan to run this planet on 7 billion programmers at some point, there is no need for everyone to learn programming. What people should learn is logical thinking, deductive reasoning, basic understanding of what a procedural process can do. An algorithm is nothing but a procedurally executed line of statements. Still, for all I know, this is what people are already taught. It's, for example, called maths class. It's, for example, called reasoning. We might have to reinforce that. We might have to look into how to better deliver it and democratize it even more. But there is no need for kindergarten children to learn programming, although the pictures are incredibly cute. Then, there's this idea that AI will magically create equal access to education. It would be great. Still, it's not going to happen, because in order to run an AI, you happen to need a computer and a couple of other things. So MOOCs, which, by the way, aren't AI by themselves. They are preset, pre-recorded content deliveries. There might be AI in scoring things, as Donald pointed out, but a MOOC is not AI. AI-based teaching and all of these can generate better opportunities, for example, if you deploy them in very remote regions where people don't have physical access to education. Nonetheless, there are lots of preconditions in there. For example, you need access to the World Wide Web. You need computing infrastructure, which also means that you need power and electricity. You need actually the time to do the learning. So if you're struggling for survival and you have to help your parents farm or harvest, you can have also fancy AIs. It doesn't change anything. This is a bigger problem, not only in education, but especially here, since everyone seems to believe that AI will change the world to the better. There's two phrasings of it. Always keep in mind, AI as we currently do it, and I know I'm a white Caucasian male from a Western European country, is made in the Northern Hemisphere, by the Northern Hemisphere, for the Northern Hemisphere. It's us solving our problems with our infrastructure. This is a bit unjust because Australia and New Zealand are also playing very well, so you could also say it's made by the first world, for the first world, in the first world. But still, in order to actually fulfill this equal access criterion, we have to solve much bigger issues. Now, a bit like spending the last minute on something positive here. So, what also Donald very, very rightfully pointed out, what AI can even do for people working in education is taking over everything which has to do with declarative knowledge. So why was the system so good at this graduate entry test? Well, because it scored excellent in history. Sure, history is usually declarative facts. It scored excellent in maths. That's simple procedural delivery. So if it would take over these teaching needs and would liberate teachers to then rather engage in skill learning, to rather also engage in the social aspects, this might actually give you a chance to, well, be human and work on the human side of things whilst relieving you from the other tasks which actually are just automatized give and take. And as such, it can also cause a bit of a shift of perception. So it can cause a shift towards revaluing the human part in teaching, precisely because people will figure that, well, knowledge delivery can be done very simply. And you can broaden that. So you can also broaden that to a general societal level. I'm very optimistic about this. If you now say, well, we deploy AI, and here the robot is AI augmented, and that it actually interacts with human users, and that it actually self-learns eventually. In this case, we can liberate people, for example, in the law professions, from hacking by hand names into serial letters. Instead, they can refocus on decision-making, on creative tasks. This can swing both ways. So what automatization is doing is it's increasing productivity levels, which puts us at something I tend to consider a societal decision. So do we want to, how is it usually called, release labor force because we are more productive and just keep everyone working at 40 hours a week but fewer people? Or do we actually do what ever since the Industrial Revolution is happening, and we, for example, shorten the working week, or we give people more chances to train and qualify? But this is something we have to decide on a societal level, and many people will now call me an idealist. There are examples where societies pushed back against the technology companies. Europe is a bit stronger on that than some other markets on this planet, but one can do it because companies also rely on the PR effect and on people buying their stuff. Still, one would have to start this discussion instead of getting stuck up on the idea that the Austrian cyborg will walk in. And final giveaway. Many of the topics I touched upon are actually mentioned in what's called Artificial Intelligence and Life in 2030, which is one of the first reports coming out of a 100-year study at Stanford. And contrary to, for example, another study Donald already mentioned, this thing is actually pretty good. It's very readable, it covers a broad range, and it's remarkably sane given the topic. Yeah. Thank you.
Now, we were true to our word. We said we'd leave plenty of time for discussion and questions, which is sometimes doesn't happen at conferences. We're bang on time. I think, to be fair, we delivered what we said we would, neither utopian nor dystopian, but maybe realistic up the middle, which is where we should be, I think. Nevertheless, I think I thought we were going to agree on everything, and thankfully we didn't. I actually disagree that data analytics is the big field in HE. I've come across many of those projects, and to be honest, it's like fiddling while Rome burns. You know, people are gathering data, but they're not doing anything about it. You want to gather data? Make decisions on the back of that data. If you're in a university and you're gathering data on student behavior, you've got 300 students, that's not data. You may as well use a spreadsheet. You know, we're using AI sometimes like a sledgehammer to crack nuts. And then ask yourself, do you count the number of students who attend lectures in your university? If you don't, you're not even in the data game. Just forget it. Don't spend the money. You're not tracking anything. So I think we have to be a bit careful just on data analytics, but I also disagree slightly on, I think there's much more power on the teaching. The adaptive learning, intelligent tutoring thing has come of age a little bit, and I've seen some real efficacy there in real work with controls and so on. So anyway, a bit of difference. Anyway, we can open it up now. We've got some people with mics. Yep, on the right here, certainly, and up on the left. Right. Who's first for a question then, or even something you've been involved in that would add to the debate? Right here, and the quite nice shirted guy on the third row back there.
I was listening this morning to Alan Winfield talking on Hard Talk, BBC Hard Talk, on why AI will never be able to care for patients in care settings. So do you think that AI will ever be able to care in the learning setting? Because obviously those who've had most impact on my life actually cared about me, not just delivered knowledge to me.
I think he was I saw this.
Yeah.
I think he was quite wrong. I've been involved in social care training, quite serious stuff, and to give you the mistake is to think that you need this, it's like the robot teacher argument. There are all sorts of aspects of social care and elderly care, and if you break it down into individual competencies and so on, like teaching social workers, for example, who look after elderly patients, they're on minimum wage, they get hardly ever any training. I've been involved in a project that actually, so my sister was a psychiatric nurse. When you walk into a room where most of the patients have dementia, it's a really simple learning point. You say your name. You say, hi, it's Donald. They may have seen you 100 times. They've forgotten your name is Donald. And if you're over 85, you'll be a blur. So there are a whole loads of learning points that you can really do the training through these intelligent tutoring systems and simulations really, really well. That's one example. The actual care itself, Nassim Reeves at Stanford wrote a brilliant book called The Media Equation, which I really highlight. It changed my life. And basically, 35 studies, good, proper scientific studies, showed that we as human beings treat computers as if they had human agency. We're easily fooled, which is why chatbots actually work. And so you don't have to have the full blood, full milk, stupid cognitive computing that IBM are trying to sell you. There's nothing cognitive about it to make it effective. You can still have assistants that do jobs within that context that are dumb and stupid, but are very focused on the task. And I think there's a whole number of competencies in that area. So I think he was wrong to write that off. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer.
Yeah, adding to that, what you also should never forget is that we tend to adapt quite quickly to the niche we are moving in. So already a couple of years ago, when I still was mostly dabbling in cognitive science, there were papers coming up where people were looking into how humans have to talk to a robot to bond closer with the robot. So it's exactly the other way around than you would expect. And what they were studying is, if you train humans to talk to the robot in a higher pitched voice, as if you would be talking to a child, you also quicker emotionally bond to your robot. This is a very artificial setup, but nonetheless, you can adapt to the given tools. So I would always be cautious how much you can push humans into anthropomorphizing things which actually are technically pieces of furniture with wheels. But yeah, there we enter this human value debate again. So is human attention in the human sense a resource which is valued, or is it in the end just behaviorism, and as long as it gives me some attention or something I can read as attention, then the question just shifts to an ethical one. Do we want that or not? And eventually the question stops being ethical because you just have such a high demand that you have to do it. But okay.
I just had something. There's my friend Federico from Italy here. He's giving a talk tomorrow, and he told me an amazing story last night about a very primitive thing around chatbots, where they're monitoring student activity, and the chatbot asks the student, "Are you worried?" And the student's saying, "Listen, I'm getting really depressed over this. I think I'm going to fail this exam." They pick up on this. The word suicide pops up in the dialogue. Really simple. So you can do NLP to identify those words, and they can identify that this kid is in real trouble, and that kid was in trouble, and they could intervene. And so really simple things can have marvelous effects, you know, in a way. I don't think we should write, you know, it's not the full milk, full blood robot thing. Very simple techniques can do wonderful things. I think that was a really good example. Come and see this guy. He's got a fantastic presentation tomorrow. Yeah, next question.
Thank you very much for two wonderful presentations. My question is for you, Tarek. I saw your speech last year as well, and as I remember it at least, I think your position was more than artificial intelligence will affect any part of your work life. Yeah. And I think, as I hear you now, you kind of moved into a position where you say, well, there's a lot of things that's not going to happen. And to be provocative to you is say, have you moved into a position where I'm kind of saying, oh, yeah, well, we'll leave it out? So,
no, the position is still the same. So artificial intelligence is affecting every step of your work life and possibly even of your daily life, for example, because there is an Amazon Alexa standing around. It's just that the impact will be a completely different one than most media predicts. So you will have to get used, for example, to human-machine collaborations. So if you are a lawyer, you will have to get used to there being the system which is doing the standard tasks. Nonetheless, I think you will still be a lawyer. It's not that the machine one day walks in and is like, yeah, it's been nice knowing you, Bob. Have a nice life, Bob. This is not how it's going to play out. So, for example, for people who, whatever excuse you have, didn't see our session last year, one of the things I'm involved in is computational creativity. So trying to build systems which mimic human creative tasks, which we also can do and which is changing certain industries. Composing an elevator jingle can be done statistically. Composing Beethoven's Heroica is completely out of reach. And the basic punchline is we're moving away from elevator jingles, but we will still want the Heroicas. And maybe, because fewer people actually have to do elevator jingles for a living, at least if we play it the right way, fewer people have to do elevator jingles for a living, there might come up more Heroicas, or Wagner's, or Strauss's, or whatever is your classical music fancy. So, yeah.
I chaired them last year, and I remember that, is there a shift in opinion? I think a general proposition would be that AI is augmenting and chewing away at some of the tasks within jobs, but it's not replacing them in the teaching and learning area. That's clearly true. Nonetheless, if you're involved in teaching, you know a lot of that is admin. I've been doing this for 30 years. A lot of my life was weighed down by the administration side of teaching and not teaching at all. That's a huge area. If we can free teachers up to teach, then that will be a huge advance. And flat e-learning ain't doing it. Wikipedia ain't doing it. Smart software, I think, will take the load off teachers. Good teachers working with this very smart software, as I've seen in ASU and other American universities, works wonders.
And thank you, by the way, for the question. One of the things, one second. One of the things I quickly want to comment on Donald said before, brains are amazing learners, at least when you see it from an AI perspective. Because all these biases and all these in Donald's view, deficient functions actually allow you to be as efficient in our living environment, to generalize between tasks. So whilst they might cause trouble in certain societal or even survival-related aspects, brains are amazing. You teach someone how to play chess, and they also, in passing, understand of what a squared playing field is. Things like these. AI doesn't do that step. Brains are domain general. So I love brains. Over to the gentleman.
Hi, thanks very much. My name's Steve Foster from UNESCO. So I really like what you're saying about AI augmenting human life, and this idea that humans have a kind of a value add and AI has a value add. And in the future, perhaps we need to find the balance between what each one does best and how we can work together. And the examples of not replacing the teacher, but getting rid of replacing some of the grunt work of teaching so that you can focus more on the really important part is fascinating. But how do you think, or what advice would you give to take us from today to, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years from now, where that could be a reality? The teaching profession at a school or post-school is it's a very political space. It's a very fraught space in many levels. And perhaps also very threatened in a sense. And perhaps this poses a threat. And how do we change that and present this as a helper? Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. You know, as I said earlier, culture always trumps tech, especially in higher education and schools. However, there are some really concrete things you can do straight off the bat if you want to move into this AI sphere a little bit and start playing with the things. And there are 2 or 3 things I would really recommend straight off. Education is a very slow learner, curiously. You know, we are still lecturing, as Plato did 2,500 years ago. Lectures and essays are still a ridiculously high proportion of the teaching and learning diet. There are 2 or 3 things I would really recommend, like a starter pack. The first one is the tail end on spaced practice. It's almost ridiculous that one of the most researched areas in cognition and learning theory is completely and utterly ignored by institutional learning. So we know that people forget. There is a forgetting curve. It's more complicated than this. And we know what to do to stop that. We know that they need repeated bites of the cherry. So if you're not recording lectures, that's dumbassed. The idea that you shouldn't allow students a second and a third bite of the cherry to content flies against everything that the psychology of learning tells us. But you can also use algorithms to, let's say you do a little course on social care and you're going into your job in 3 months' time or sitting an exam, I can then deliver reinforced learning to you over a period. And there are set algorithms that are pretty good at that, and I can deliver it by email and so on. So spaced practice is one. Adaptive learning is another one. I've just seen real empirical evidence that this works, especially on 101 college courses. And don't be scared of just knowledge. It's not high-end critical knowledge, sort of, you know, postdoc and doc stuff, but it matters. And that would be the second thing. A third one is the creation of content, which, if you've ever been involved in it, is a really painful process. Faculty meets instructional designer, lots of angst and friction, takes months to produce, loads of money. We can now, in a sense, replace some of those functions by AI using entity analysis to create basic content, but better than the crappy old. Really, honestly, I sold this stuff for 30 years. I feel embarrassed now, you know, selling people the text graphics. And all we've done is sort of make it even worse. There's a very good phrase in English, all fur coat and no knickers, you know. It's all front-end graphics, it's all gamification, it's all this, that, and the next thing. And the learning has shrunk to almost nothing because of the cognitive overload. So I think there were 3 things there I would say are entry points or doors you can open for the use of this technology and get real increases in productivity. With spaced practice, I reckon it's a 200% to 300% increase in learning productivity if you do it well. And of course, kids do this already. They don't learn in a lecture room. They learn when they go back to the quiet of their own room in the library and start reinforcing the learning on their own. That's how you become a sophisticated learner. That's why I'm 60 years old. I'm not going to go back to college. I know how to learn. Because I learned all those tricks. Nobody taught them to me, I should add, but I had to learn them on my own.
Okay. This might also be a point Donald and I might disagree upon on reasons which are much more personal than content related. but on a much more meta level. So one of the preconditions which need to be met, in my opinion, in order to have the beneficial outcome is to somehow stop seeing education, both on higher education level and on basic education level, as a market-driven mechanism. So of course it's very tempting, as soon as you see that you can automatize things, to not keep human staff on the board and give them the time and the space to do the social interaction, but to much rather than say, well, if we can get equivalent output, we can get the same graduation rate, we have the same number of academics in the end, then we just axe the human staff. I'm German by origin, I'm now working in the UK, so I've grown up in a system where education is free and unconditional to everyone. I'm working in a system where education is much more market-oriented, and there is benefits and downsides to either. Nonetheless, if I would currently see my work environment and AI on that level was deployed, I'm very certain that the staff numbers would go down. In my previous system, the staff numbers couldn't go down because people are civil servants. Also has downsides. Still, so in a way, try to get the market aspect out of it, try to make sure that there is sufficient public awareness and public will to recognize this human value, which also is why I'm preaching it whenever I can, because I hope that eventually someone will be a governmental advisor and just hammer it into them. But these are now political levels between different orientations and inklings, which, yeah.
Question down the front here. Quick mic. 3 rows back. Yeah. Great.
Hello, Jens Stutte from Cornelsen. Donald, you leveraged much, you talked much about adaptive learning as one of the future things. I would agree on that. We are also quite focusing on this in our company, and but there is one target conflict, I would say, because adaptive learning can work only good if you have full access to the learning records, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And on the other hand, learning records are often considered on the same level of confidentiality and privacy as health data. So actually, we need for the future, I think, good policies and also good advices for our policymakers in order to make things possible that we would like to do and that we are convinced will help people in the future, but that we cannot do in the current legal system.
Yeah, this is a good question. It really concerns me, this, because, first of all, you know, adaptive learning very often works on will-o'-the-wisp data. In other words, it's temporary data that's just held and disappears again. You don't need to worry about that under any legislation. But the learning records, the storing of learning records, it really worries me because I don't think it's such a big problem. In the UK, we have an organization called JISC that spent millions going around all the universities in the UK, making data potentially available to students if they asked for it. And at the end of the program, how many students actually asked for their data? None. They're not interested. Because it's crappy data, who cares? You know, it's no big deal. And I think the danger is that the legislation and regulation that's now coming out from Brussels is worryingly restricted and will actually cramp down, because we have the best AI researchers in the world in Europe. It's an absolute powerhouse at the moment, but we're hopeless at, you know that list of companies I put up at the beginning? There's a reason there's not a single European company in that list, is because we're great at research, we're crap at application. And if we continue to do all the research and wonderful people like Tarek doing all the work, but it doesn't get realized, then the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans who are doing this, all these examples I'm giving you are from the US. And if we simply make mistakes on regulation around data because 50-year-old liberals get obsessed by the issue, and when students aren't, I think we could be in trouble. That was a bit of a political answer.
Yeah, well, this also ties back into actually technology literacy skills among governments and among decision makers. So I'm occasionally engaging here in Berlin on not the highest levels, but in advisory. And sure, so you have people deciding on questions from agriculture to education, from military to social welfare. And it's pretty hard to keep the right level of expertise there, because also you always mingle in politics. Still, it's a societal decision, and it might take years. We might lose the tech race until then, if there actually is a we versus them, which also is always a bit questionable. But yeah, you have to change regulations. You have to make people who lead the regulation making understand what's really happening. So all of you go out there, talk to your parliamentary representatives. Whenever you get an invitation to advise and talk to them, go there, do it. It might be cumbersome, it's highly frustrating because usually it doesn't change anything. But if it does, you made the world an epsilon better.
There's one thing I would add to that. It's interesting, the AI world, which I now work in almost wholly. I've been around for a long time seeing waves of technology. I've never come across a field that is so self-reflective on moral issues. In almost every country in the world, Australia, the US, the UK, there are several centers that are well-funded, 10 million minimum, that are looking at the ethical issues such as this question. I've never seen that in technology before, but it's, by and large, I think it was really heartening that it's driven by the AI community itself. One exception might be Silicon Valley's drive. Tarek made this point, and I would agree that sometimes that could be overhyped. But I think it's an area that really is self-aware of itself, and really concerned about the automation of weaponry, for example, which is happening. So I think there are some interesting checks and balances in all this. Now it actually just hit 0 there, right on the button there, so we've come to the end of our session with perfect timing. I want to thank you for the contributions, obviously, from the audience. That was the aim. We did manage to get some good 20 minutes in there. Thanks very much for turning up, and I hope you have a great conference. There's one other session tomorrow, as I say, just on chatbots. If you're interested in not the dystopian or utopian, but realistic path on chatbots, 2:35 tomorrow. That's another good session. So thank you very much for coming, and have a great conference.